Hello, hello, hello. Hello, I'm here this is Marshall Goldsmith, and welcome to LinkedIn Live, sponsored by our wonderful 100 Coaches organization, Thinkers50, number one organization for ranking and evaluating leadership and management thought, and put on by the wonderful organization Methods, who really does a great job of providing online learning for people during today's challenging times. I'm going to briefly introduce myself and then we will begin. I have a wonderful guest today who's going to be my co-host. My name is Marshall. I'm from a small town called Valley Station, Kentucky. I went to school in Indiana. I got a PhD at UCLA. I was a college professor and dean when I was very young. Then for 43 years, I've done three predominant things. I give talks or teach classes, travel all around the world speaking and teaching, been to 102 countries, and on the American Airlines, I have 11 million frequent flyer miles. So I'm a mega traveler. I write and edit books and articles. I've written or edited 41 books, 6 bestsellers, 3 big New York Times bestsellers. And then I also coach executives. I've been the coach of the CEO of Ford, Pfizer, Glaxo, the World Bank, all kinds of wonderful organizations. And I went to a program called Design the Life You Love a couple years ago. The program was put on by a wonderful person named Aisha Brissell. And Aisha said, "Who are your heroes?" My heroes were very kind and generous people who were great teachers. She said, "You should be like these people." I thought, well, that's a great idea. What can I do to be more like these people who are heroes to me? So I decided I would adopt 15 people, teach them all I know for free. And the only price is when they get old, they would have to do the same thing. So I came up with this idea. I made a little selfie video and put it on LinkedIn. It turned out to be the most widely viewed video in the history of LinkedIn. I have about 1.3 million followers. And ended up, I thought 100 people would apply and I would adopt 15. Well, it turned out over 18,000 applied, and I have about 250 honorary children. So this is a wonderful, wonderful program. And one of the ones I'm most proud of is with us today, Sanyin Siang. And Sanyin is wonderful. Sanyin is the Thinkers50 number one coach of the year. The award is called the Marshall Goldsmith Award. I used to be number one, and now I'm retired from coaching. And the number one coach I'm honored to say is Sanyin. I think, and by the way, she was chosen, well, I would have probably chosen her anyway. She was chosen by Thinkers50, a wonderful, wonderful selection. Sanyin works at the Duke Coach K Leadership and Ethics Center. She is a person who's an author of the Launch Book. She's a professor at the engineering school. She's been a top LinkedIn influencer for 2 years in a row. And she is a mother, and she's just a wonderful human being. So very, very honored. And even better, in our programs that we're doing, our LinkedIn Live, she's going to be my co-host. So that's very good because I forget things half the time, and it'll be very good to have someone help me. And also a member of our fine thinkers, a member of our fine 100 Coaches organization as well. Sanyin, a couple of words to say about yourself, and then we'll get started.
That's great. And then for viewers out there, if you have questions, be sure to type them in the chat, and both Marshall and I will love to continue to answer these questions. So I'm, as Marshall said, I am a mom, I'm a coach, I'm an author, I'm an educator, and in all of these things, the one thing that ties them all together is I love chipping away, helping people chip away at everything that isn't, so the purest them remain, the best them remain. And that best them is how they can best contribute to the world. And that's what gives me joy so much in coaching. And so it's a joy to be here with you, Marshall, and I've learned so much from you, and I continue to learn a lot from you. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, you do so many interesting things. Just tell us a little bit about what are some of the fun things that you do.
So in my background, I have one of those eclectic backgrounds. Started off as a biomedical engineer, then went off to look at science, ethics, and policy and law, and then went from there to business school, and then became very involved with the sports industry and coaching. And I guess the one thing that all that eclectic background does is it gives me a lens to find patterns throughout, find patterns in leadership and in ethics. And it allows me to I work with military generals. I work also with Fortune 500 CEOs, startup founders, and students. And at the end of the day, they're all human beings. But what I do is find across all these sectors and industries, what are the patterns? And I guess throughout my life, across all these different things I've done, it's about finding patterns and analogies.
Now, what are some of the key themes in your work? Because you do so many interesting things. What are some of the key themes that come across in your work?
So, first, let me go from a more global perspective. I love looking at what are the major shifts. That's what's different between before and now, so that we can prepare leaders to be most effective for what's next. And one of the key shifts, and that's something I write a lot about, is we've gone from this complicated world to a complex world, meaning we've gone from a linear thinking that's required to now one that is more of an ecosystem type of thinking. So it's not only about first order effects, but second and third order effects. And then as a part of that, as a result of that, to really be successful in this type of environment, the second theme that runs through my work is the power of teams working together and teams of teams, the interdependencies. And then if we drill down to the individual level, it's about, all right, how does that individual contribute to those teams and then also help those teams be better? So it's that dynamism that I'm truly excited about. And in my coaching work and also in my board work, as we all know, and something I learned from you, Marshall, is we all have blind spots. And so helping that individual understand their blind spots, because every time we shift context, what got you here won't get you there, right? Every time we shift context, see what I'm learning from you? Every time we shift context, something that might have been a strength might actually be a detriment. Yep.
You should write a book. What got you here won't get you there. Great title. Someone should write a book about that. I love that one. Now, Sanyin, you talked about this first order and second order and third order. And again, you got to help me. I missed that one. What does that mean? Because I'm not sure what you mean by that.
All right. So as an example, actually, this was something that I'll give an example from that we learned from Rob Nail over at Singularity University. I think it's a great example. So Rob posed to us this question of, what if you were a energy drink company, what could potentially disrupt your company? So a first order would be, well, other energy drink competitors. So your Red Bull, it might be Monster, and so forth. But his answer surprised us. He's like, what can truly disrupt our industry might be self-driving cars. Because if you look at when people consume energy drinks, it's when they drive long drives. So self-driving cars can potentially disrupt the energy drink industry. Something that's completely not even tangential, but actually that's an example of a third order effect that actually may have as much importance as the first order effect. So that's what I mean by going from linear to think about the ecosystem.
Yeah, you mentioned that my daughter sent me kind of a cartoon, and it said, related to this first and second order, he says, who says one person cannot change the world? Who says one person cannot change the world? Ask the guy that ate the raw bat.
Oh my gosh. Well, if you think about it, we all have blind spots, right? And part of being able to change the world is to be able to understand what are the potential blind spots. We need that diversity. We need not only the people we think should be involved to understand, but also the second and the third, the people who are also tangential. And that's the type of world we live in.
I love that example you gave of the energy drink and the car. I mean, who would have thought about the connection between energy drink and car? Now that you mention it, it makes a ton of sense. It just makes a ton of sense. Now, one thing, we're in hard times right now, and as you know, with the virus and with all the traumas people are having, one term you came up with, which I just love, is comforter and chief. Comforter in chief. Now tell everybody, what do you mean by this term, comforter in chief?
So I spent a lot of my time thinking about what are the new requirements of leadership for leading today and tomorrow and what's different. And I think one of those big shifts is our leaders who are also able to be more in touch with their emotions and leverage that and lean in on that to be able to connect with others. So I thought about the comforter in chief because in my coaching work and also in my work at the Coach K Leadership and Ethics Center, the business school, over the last few weeks, talking with different leaders, some of the common themes are I now have employees who have tested positive, and they're fighting for their lives, or they have a loved one who just passed away as a consequence of COVID, or we're all grieving this loss of a way of life that we fear might never return, right?
Mm.
And how do you deal with that, or is that your responsibility as a business leader to deal with that? And so thought through that some more. And I think here's something that's fundamentally changed as a result of COVID. Before, it was a lot easier to separate our work and our lives, right? But now, I mean, with suddenly the ubiquitousness of remote work, our work lives and our family lives are so deeply intertwined. So yes, grief and sorrow have now entered into the workplace and is now part of the responsibility of the business leaders also to be able to inject hope in their people, inspire them, while giving them the truth about the reality of the situation, and also give them a little bit of comfort, right? And think about Queen Elizabeth's speech a few weeks ago. In just 5 minutes, how much comfort she brought to her subjects and also to the rest of the world. And I think today, that's not only the role of our government authorities nor religious authorities, it's now also the role of the business leader, because grief has now entered into the workplace.
It's interesting because I think one theme that I've seen very consistent with what you've just said is I really think people today appreciate things that are more human. I've noticed rather than putting on a show or being polished or, I don't know, proving how smart you are, people, I think, today more appreciate more vulnerability, more humanity. One thing we all have in common is death. And, this specter of illness, of death is very real. And I think it cuts through a lot of this sort of pretense of life. And people just tend to appreciate more a sense of humanness. And by the way, it's in a way a very positive thing. I think people have become more human. And even though we are physically isolated, maybe more appreciative of each other. And someone said, although we're distant, we seem closer. What do you think?
One, I think at the end of the day, we don't follow positions or titles. We follow human beings, right? What's that Maya Angelou quote? People will forget what you did for them. People will forget what you said, but they'll never forget how you make them feel. And that feeling part has to come from us all starting off as human beings first before we are business leaders. And I think this notion of, the world of 20, 30 years ago was still built on this construct of the Ford Model T assembly line, this hierarchy or, where it's about productivity and routine. The world of today, because of so much uncertainty and black swans, it's one where we need our people's imagination. We need their courage to take risks, strategic risks, and their courage to just think about what might be possible, right? And that all of that requires a type of psychological safety, which when we're dealing with all this has to do with comfort, right? Comfort.
One person that both you and I admire is our friend Alan Mulally. Alan was probably one of the great CEOs in the world. And one of the things he has successfully did in his role is create psychological safety by really focusing on behavior so that people were free to express their problems, free to say, I'm not doing well, free to say, I'm lost, I don't know the answers. And he modeled that by always being able to say, look, I know less than you do. What are some of your reflections from our friend Alan in terms of how he did such a great job of creating psychological safety in a very different world?
He also does it in a very different way. So what I've discovered in speaking from, listening to Alan and also speaking with him recently is one of his superpowers that is so rare is he sees with absolute clarity the objectives, how defining the problem, the objectives,
Yes.
and what needs to be done, and people's roles. And when you think about it, a lot of what leaders do is managing people's emotions and energies. And because of that absolute clarity that he provides, people have a sense of what their purpose is, what their role is. There's no uncertainty, or he is able to minimize the uncertainty around that, right? And so that is a type of psychological safety that, because of that superpower, I think is why Alan has been so continuously successful in everything that he has done. And then it links back to something you said earlier, Marshall, which is when we're now here and we're dealing with death, I think it's about we now have more clarity about what's important and what matters, right? And that
What really matters.
clarity, what really matters. And that was obfuscated before. What were we chasing? Now we know what really matters when you're confronted with death or the potential death of your loved ones. And I think that clarity in itself, so part of being able to be a comforter in chief is we have to embrace our own discomfort and our own grief so that we can arrive at that clarity and we can reach out, lean in on that to reach out to others and also allow others to comfort us. Because even though this might be a very soulful type of endeavor, it should be by no means a soul endeavor. Goes back to what, I also learned from you and also from Coach K. It's about believing in each other. It's about leaning on each other, being with each other, helping and receiving, right?
Yeah, there was a great philosopher that said this one time. You know what he said? He said, we all need someone we can lean on.
Should we sing that song together? Lean on me.
I got a
For
good
the
question
lyrics.
I got a question about resilience.
Yes.
I got a question about resilience here.
We won't bore our viewers with singing. We'll say that for another time.
Resilience. Now, in today's world, resilience is more important than ever. You know more about this topic than I do. Give me some guidelines on how do you encourage not only leaders, but everybody to demonstrate and have a little more resilience.
So when I think about resilience, we often associate resilience as getting back from a failure. But how I would define failure is simply an outcome that other than the one that we wanted, right? So that athlete who has prepared super hard and is super talented, there's no guarantee of a win because it might be a bad weather or it might be something completely out of their control. So it's circumstances beyond our control, and then how do we move forward and pivot in spite of our plans being completely reshuffled by something like a pandemic, right? And so I think about resilience also. There's short-term resilience, like all right, if this were a thunderstorm, we can just buckle down and weather through it. But to deal with long-term resilience, this isn't a thunderstorm. It's a season. It's a season. It might even be several seasons. How do we sustain ourselves through that? And I think individually we have a reservoir of grit and resilience. However, how we augment and replenish that resilience, replenish our soul, so to speak, is through friendships, meaningful relationships. It goes back to, we just sung Lean on Me. It goes back to leaning on each other. So it's a role of friendships, it's a role of rest and reflection, understanding who we are. And I think also just what we demonstrated, role of laughter and play, so important, right? So important.
Well, one of our common friends is Carol Kaufman, Dr. Carol Kaufman.
Yes.
And Carol has been a trauma therapist. One thing she said last week when we talked together is she said, we're moving from the acute phase to the chronic phase. And that goes back to what you said, because when we started in this, it was kind of like, well, this is going to be over in 3 weeks or 2 weeks or something. And now we're getting, well, maybe not. Maybe this is going to last for a while. That really reinforces that concept of resilience. Any comments on moving from something that's acute, which is maybe painful but short term, to something that's chronic, which in Carol's term was longer term and not going away next week?
Yeah. So, two other friends of mine and I just recently wrote a piece around how you build resilience for the long term. And one is the dean of the Duke Divinity School, Greg Jones, and the other one is a retired four-star general, Robert Brooks Brown, who was commander of the troops in Mosul during one of the toughest times there. And what we discovered throughout sharing our common experiences is that if we think about this as soul, replenishing our soul and understanding who we are and our relationship to the world and our purpose, then our soul can be feel depleted, right? And so even for the short term, there's enough of a reservoir, but for the long term, it's going to be depleted unless we find ways to refill it. And ways that we refill that, friendships. Friendships, meaningful relationships, because friends remind us of what matters and what matters in life, and they add meaning to our lives. And think about teams too, friendships. I think about like our MG 100 colleagues or our LPR groups. The reason why I'm excited about our weekly LPR group calls is those replenish my soul, right? And then the element of reflection, so important too.
Let me stop you for a second because the listeners don't know what you're talking about now. So let me just give them a little background, and I'd like your input. So Sanyin and I, and we're very honored, both of us are very honored to be in a group with I'm the Hall of Fame ex-coach, and then Sanyin she won the award, but 6 of the top coaches in the world, according to Thinkers50, 6 of the top 8 are in our group. And we meet every week. And in this LPR process called Life Plan Review, my friend Alan Mullally kind of inspired it with his business plan review. We meet every week and talk about our lives and red, yellow, green. What are we doing well? What do we need to do better? And, I'll share some of my reflections on this, but Sanyin, share some of your reflection on what it's like to be part of this group of people that meets every week to talk about life.
Well, one thing that a pattern that I see among all of us is that we're lifelong learners, right? It's precisely our vulnerability and recognition that we may be good in particular areas, but we can always learn. And there's always in coaching, it's an entire journey, right? Like, so I'm learning techniques also from my fellow LPR members, and they're learning techniques from me, and we're all learning from you, and vice versa. And so this one is being a lifelong learner and being vulnerable and humble enough to be able to do that. And second is we build on each other. So, Gabby Tisdale, who was on the show last week, something I learned from her is we think about impact and we think about numbers, but we don't know. We don't know our full impact. And sometimes when we do something, we may not see the numbers, but that one person whose life that we helped make better, that is significant, right? It may not be significant number wise, but that is significant. And I think about us all leading a life of significance. I think that's what a lot of what our LPR discussions are. How do we add
Yeah,
contribution to the world?
yeah. And you're also a member of the 100 Coaches group, which I love that group. And again, you were one of the very early members of that group. Yeah. So, what are some of your reflections as to be a member of this group? And by the way, the idea of the group is we have no money involved, no guilt, no expectation. Just we all try to help each other, and the idea is just give back. So, what are some of your reflections on being part of that group?
I think this open exchange of ideas and bringing ourselves. So the open exchange of ideas. So Aisha Brazil, for example, I am such a fan of her
Mhm.
design the life, and I'm learning so much. I mean, we had a conversation the other day, and I was talking to her about paradoxes, and I said, you know what? We're living in a world of paradoxes right now. That to be impactful instead of doing, it's about inaction right now. Or we're more globally connected, but locally it feels isolated. And she said something profound. She said, you know, paradoxes, that's where the opportunities are created. I just thought, oh my goodness. And so this exchange of idea, and the learning is made stickier because of the human relationships that are formed, because we're also being vulnerable and bringing ourselves. And Francis Hesselbein, our dear friend and mentor, the one who brought us together, Marshall. I mean, Francis,
Right.
we've learned so much from Francis over the years, and I think she also exemplifies that. And she's a member of our MG 100, along with
She
Jim
is.
Kim. Yeah,
Number one member.
number one.
She's the number one, right. And so just an amazing person. Now, another just really good basic question is you got ranked the number one coach there by Thinkers 50 in the world. Very, very big honor. And what advice do you have for leaders other than being that comforter in chief, which is great advice? What's one final bit of advice you might have for leaders of coaching during these turbulent times, coaching in a time of crisis?
During turbulent times, I think our tendency is to, one, retract, so we are just in our own thoughts, and two, when we feel a loss of control elsewhere, that's when we want to exert even more control. Resist both urges. The retraction, yes, reflection is absolutely necessary. However, to figure out the problem, you don't have the answers by yourself. You can't. The problem is so much bigger. So engage others to co-create the solution and to co-define what the problem is, right? And then this idea of wanting to control, as human beings, we all desire that. And so when we feel loss of control and we exert control, resist that urge, step back. And that's when empowering others is so important. And then being vulnerable and letting others, part of giving up control is also being vulnerable and letting others help you because they want to help. They all want to solve the problem and have ownership in it. So let them. It'll be so much better because of it.
Now, I just thought of something. You're there at Duke, and my fine daughter, Dr. Kelly Goldsmith, is a graduate of Duke. So I've written several large checks to your fine school. And so, I'm a great fan of Duke. And now I realize that Duke not only has you as a number one Thinkers 50 coach, you also have the number one basketball coach, Coach K. So, what have you
Number one.
learned as a coach from Coach K?
So one of the things that Coach always says is it's not only enough that they know it, they have to feel it. And it goes back to the role of emotions, this idea that as leaders, managing emotions and energies. And it's not, they also have to feel it in order for them to know it and believe it. And the other thing is this idea of belief in each other, believing in someone. That's one of the most powerful things that you can do. You believe in me, Marshall. And that's one of the things that has made such a tremendous impact on my life. Francis Hasselbein believed in me. Coach K, all my amazing mentors. Oh, and something I joke about, but it's actually quite true. If Marshall Goldsmith and Coach K had an intellectual love child, it would be me. And I think I'm an only child right now.
I'm more than honored to be your co-father along with the wonderful Coach K. Well, I'm still processing this intellectual love child thing, but I'm going to work on that.
I love you, Marshall.
Yeah.
I love you.
I was thinking about that. Another song comes to mind. Now, finally, in wrapping up, look, I just want to say I'm so looking forward to you. And you and I are going to have so much fun working together on this LinkedIn Live, number one. Number two, we're going to have great guests. So be thinking about, like Aisha Bursell, one of the top designers in the world. I have to have her on our show.
Yeah.
And so we're going to have some great guests. We're going to have lots of fun. And so I am so honored to be working with you. Thank you so much for joining us today. It's been my joy to work with you today, and I'm looking forward to working with you. And then I'm going to, since you are my intellectual love child with Coach K, I'm going to be happy when I'm not around to run the show to delegate everything to you. So Sanyin, honored to be with you. Thank you so much. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marshall, for everything.
Bye.